It's the heart of baseball season, which is, subjectively, at least to me, the most wonderful time of the year. And we're coming up on Memorial Day weekend, which, as I've brought up in the past, is kind of the first big checkpoint of the season for a lot of people. It's kind of where you know whether or not your team is a contender or pretender. And then there were certain teams where you're still trying to figure it out. Now, thankfully, I'm very grateful to say this, we have a team in Detroit that we know is a contender. As of the time of this recording, they have the best record in Major League Baseball. And we're going to have Foolish Baseball, Bailey, a.k.a. Foolish Baseball, to come on here and talk about all that. I am going to ask about the Tigers a little bit, but it gives me an opportunity to talk about things on more of a national level. I feel like I tweet about baseball all the time. I watch baseball all the time, but I don't have a national baseball podcast. So having Bailey on once a year, or hopefully more going forward, allows me to wet my beak a little bit. And there's not anybody on YouTube, in my opinion, who is as talented, smart, and entertaining with the stuff that they put out than Foolish Baseball. He is instantly recognizable with his brand and the kind of videos that he puts out. Last time I asked him a lot about where his content came from. I questioned him on the fact that he knows German. But today we're just going to do straight baseball talk. So if you like hearing two people that know baseball talk baseball, you're really going to like this one. Before we jump into the show, just want to make a few show notes. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell. That way you're notified. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on Spotify. Continue to support us there. Our content is getting updated every single day at CastellaniContent.com. There we have archived all the Tiger videos, all the Michigan football, basketball videos, all Say This episodes, Chris Company videos, all in one place. It's very easy to use. So if you have an itch that you want to scratch and say, I was looking for that one episode of this show, it's there. All right. You could go there and find it. Boom, bing, bang, boom, Express A train. All right. Lone Goat, June 6th, Detroit Tigers watch party. That thing's really picking up steam. Can't wait for that. Cannot wait for that, man. I'm so excited. And people at Lone Goat have been promoting it a little bit as well. Nervous, but feeling better about it now than I have in the past. I mean, I think this is a really exciting opportunity, and I can't wait to mingle and interact with the fans, man. It's really a special thing that has probably been a long time coming. So yeah, I think that should do it. We will be back after the interview to kind of wrap things up, but let's just jump right into our interview with our friend Bailey, aka Foolish Baseball. Second time on the program is Bailey, a.k.a. Foolish Baseball. Always a good time. One of my favorite YouTubers out there. Has been not just a friend of this program, but technically a friend of multiple programs going back to when I was on Locked On. So greatly appreciate it. Bailey, how are things going for you, man?
They're going well, and I appreciate the Locked On shout out because I saw your collab with you and Scotty Bentley, and I was like, oh, finally, this is. Do you know when there was an episode of like Blue's Clues where like there was Steve and Joe at the same time, Yes.
Yes. It was the Jimmy Timmy Power Hour
exactly.
For Nickelodeon. Exactly. The two of us combining. So yeah, no, it's wonderful. Yeah, I always have a great relationship with Scott, and always was happy to have him on the show. And the last few times that I've talked to you, like I ask people about the Tigers, but I've always asked them with that caveat of being like, dude, you don't have time to watch Tigers. Like now, all of a sudden, we're in a much different age. Where as of the time of this recording, they have the best record in baseball, in the playoffs a year ago. But I really think the start of this year like makes it more important because it just shows like, okay, there's actual carryover. There's not a flukiness to it. Like we're not. No disrespect, but we're not the Marlins in 23, where it's just like you have a successful campaign, then you bottom out. And so, I mean, yeah, they've kind of been one of the stories of baseball going back to the latter part of last season. And, I'm in it all the time, as are the people that follow me as such diehard fans. But as somebody who is, a diehard baseball fan, but also somewhat an outsider when it comes to the Detroit stuff, who has gotten exposure to them based on the fact that they were in the postseason last year and, the features on MLB Network and such this year. What's been the change or the biggest thing that you've noticed about that organization now compared to where they were over really about a decade there?
I think it's kind of the homegrown players. Like even when, pre 2024 season, there was buzz about the Tigers and there was buzz about the AL Central as a whole. Really, a lot. The Royals too were making big offseason moves, and the way that the Tigers made the playoffs last year wasn't really how people anticipated, right? It was, pitching chaos, a bunch of guys that, the average baseball fan hadn't even heard of, 6 months earlier. It was, one of their big acquisitions like Jack Flaherty traded at the deadline. They were deadline sellers. So even if you were in on the Tigers going into 2024 as a sleeper somehow, the way they did it would have been completely unanticipated. And that has kind of continued because we're seeing, for me, what stands out right now when I look at the team is their hitting. And I think, the way a lineup kind of can outperform expectations, it's not necessarily going to be because your stars performed as expected, your Riley Green, your Kerry Carpenter type hitters. It's going to be because a guy like Dylan Dingler came out of nowhere to become like, an average to above average everyday catcher, right? So, it's because, he's not homegrown technically, but a utility guy like Zach McKinstry, took a step forward or something like that. Trey Sweeney, who they acquired. So it's like it's getting production out of unexpected places, and I think it's baseball as a whole is kind of coming to grips with the fact that this Tigers team might very well be legit and not a fluke, like you said.
Yeah, and I think honestly where it comes from and why it happened, I think as quickly as it did, going back to last season, is the fact that what we've learned is the previous era, of Al Avila running things, was not void of talent, and they knew how to acquire talent. It was ineptitude when it came to the development of that talent. Because like Dylan Dingler was a guy, in the COVID year draft, he was their second pick behind Torkelson. I mean, this is a highly sought after talent who was okay in the minors, like, kind of became an afterthought. And then Scott Harris gets here. They get their player development system in place. And all of a sudden guys like him have developed. And, you talk about getting production out of, random places. And you're right, especially because this is a team that, they've been without three key pieces. Matt Vierling comes back, I think, this week. Parker Meadows is yet to play a game. Wencel Perez is yet to play a game. One of probably the biggest what the fuck of the season, not just for the Tigers, but maybe in Major League Baseball, is this Javy Baez resurgence. And the fact that we had a guy who was, and this isn't hyperbole either, the worst qualified offensive player in baseball a year ago, wasn't much better the year before, who's now not just putting together timely hits, but playing a great, an elite level center field. What do you make of this, and how much of it do you think is sustainable in regards to Javy's production?
Yeah, I think the way I sort of categorize sort of what's happening with this offense is like there's certain players where like I believe in it, and there's certain players where I have my doubts. And I think Baez kind of falls in the middle for me. The swing decisions and the chase overall are still very much there. I think what we've seen is just better batted ball quality, right? Being able to pull that ball in the air more. At a certain point, if you homer, every 15 plate appearances, what happens in the other 14 doesn't really matter all that much, and but that's also something that can get exposed across a smaller sample versus a large one. So I'm very excited by it, but I am feeling a little bit maybe more cautious than others would be about it.
I'm extremely cautious. Yeah, I think it's a great story. I think it's really cool. I don't see it sustaining itself. One, it's so funny because they talk on the broadcast all the time about like it's the lowest chase rate of his career. It's still a really bad chase rate. Like he still swings at more pitches than almost any other hitter. It's down. What he's done that he wasn't doing the last several years is he's crushing mistakes, and he's kind of finding that hobby magic again of hitting pitches that are out of the zone. Stuff that he hadn't really been able to do. Him finding it in center field of all places. That's just good luck, and a credit to his athleticism. I mean, nobody expected that. The other guy that I want to bring up, because it's somebody that you've talked about, you've been high on, even when other people weren't, and was Spencer Torkelson. Because I think it was coming into the 23 season, after what was a pretty disastrous rookie campaign, you had him as one of the 5 hitters that you really liked. And, he goes on to have a 30 home run, 90 RBI season. Last year, gets off to a terrible start. They gave him chance after chance. He got sent down. Called back up at the end of the year, was maybe a little bit better, but not much better. And now up to this point has had, finally looked like the 1-1 pick that they've needed. He's played a good first base. He's hitting home runs. He's producing runs. there were so many things that were wrong a year ago, but I guess what were the things that you saw from him originally that made you think, even when he was struggling, the resurgence was in there, or that the talent was there?
There's the way I see it, there's really only three things you have to look at with regards to a hitter. It's distribution of the batted balls, how many, fly balls do they hit versus line drives versus ground balls, pulling the ball, things like that. It's how hard they hit the ball. You're looking at average exit velocity, barrel rate, whatever. And then it's, what I would just call strike zone control. It's swing decisions and it's contact rate. And when you looked at Torkelson, even in 2022, which was true, yeah, like you said, a disastrous rookie season for a 1-1 guy. He was still showing positive signs in a lot of those areas. And I think that sort of came into fruition to some degree in 2023 when he hit, 31 home runs, for a team that really could use like a consistent 30 home run hitter. Even if, maybe the on base wasn't the best or the average wasn't the best. And this year, you're seeing just kind of a culmination of all those skills. And I'm really happy for him. I hope he can keep it up. And I think maybe we saw a preview of this when he got called back up in the second half of 2024, because he did look quite a bit better, even if maybe the results didn't fully bear out, what he's done in 2025 so far.
Yeah, and it's a weird thing. I think the Tigers handled it well, and I don't know how much attention you paid to it, but he did, like, by definition, I'm not going to say lose his job, but had to fight for it, because Colt Keith gets moved to first. Glaber gets signed to play second. Like, if he doesn't have a really good spring training, which he did, he was amongst the best hitters in the Grapefruit League, there's a chance he doesn't even make the team. I mean, that's how, kind of, the tightrope that he was walking at time. One more Tiger question, and it's something that I get asked all the time, which is the guy who's in the poster behind me, Tarik Skubal, our guy, our ace. Look, we get attached to pitchers here in Detroit, and we think back to Verlander, we think back to the Scherzers of the world, and I think this is probably more comparable to, it's kind of a cross between, because he's homegrown the way that Verlander was, but he's also a Boris client the way that Scherzer was. And this has been the big kind of hullabaloo over the last year, is what happens to Tarik Skubal after 2026 when he becomes a free agent. And the general gist that I've gotten is, because he's a Boris client, he's going to hit free agency, and he's going to do what Soto's done and what Scherzer did in the past, which is go to the highest bidder. As far as Detroit's mindset is concerned, we're talking about a dominant lefty, a power pitcher who's throwing 100 plus consistently. Do you think that the assessment of Tarik Skubal by the end of 2026 will be similar to where it is currently in 2025, or do you think it'll be similar to something like a Corbin Burns thing, where he's still a very effective pitcher, but maybe the data isn't quite what it was at his peak?
Probably more so the former. I mean, Burns, leading into his free agency, you saw, the stuff sort of decline year over year. Still a very effective pitcher in terms of run prevention. But the strikeout rate went down every year, so he lost, the cutter, at times, in Baltimore last year. So, I mean, for Skubal, it's going to be probably more so the underlying stuff. His velocity, his velocity is, I think, even up this year compared to last year. It's gone
up the last 3 years.
Right. Which is absurd. So if he keeps that up, then I think you are, talking about him, potentially running into probably like a record-breaking contract for a pitcher, and if that's the case, if the stuff is still just like the elite of the elite, the thing that I think we've seen about pitching trends in baseball, I'm going to say, at least last, 10, 20 years, is that 99th percentile pitching, like the guys who are that good, tend to age really well. Look at Wheeler, look at Scherzer in his 30s, look at Verlander, the second tiers of guys, the Corbin Burns, the Aaron Nola, we'll have to see, because we've seen some stuff decline there. But if Skubal is in that conversation as he's entering his free agency years, like, I think teams will respond to what has been overall like a very good aging curve for guys who are just that good.
It's a really good point, because I think the mindset that some people have is like, at some point there's a velo drop. At some point there's, diminishing stuff. And That's true, but his stuff is so overwhelmingly good that even if it drops 10%, like we're still looking at an elite pitcher. I mean, DeGrom looks great for the Rangers right now. And look at how many injuries he's gone through. And, knows he's not throwing 102. He's throwing 98, and he's still been very effective. So I could see, even if there is kind of bumps in the road, obviously I want him here. I mean, I love Tarik. It's been really last season before the playoffs was totally worth it just for his kind of ascension. But I want to move on to some other teams here who have had some kind of a rough go of things to begin 2025. And one that I feel like nobody saw this coming, but the vibes just weren't great coming into the year was the Baltimore Orioles, which was a team that a few years back, obviously a 100-win ball club, and they get swept by the Rangers after winning the East, but the general belief was this is the start of something. This is the beginning of this new age of Baltimore baseball. They have this young core. Had a fine year last year, but took a step back. Disastrous offseason, let's be real. I mean, lose Corbin. You replace him with Charlie Morton, wonderful career, but is pretty much cooked. You're pretty uninspired in free agency. And beyond that, though, I think the biggest thing is this core that we raved about, that I was so big on, has regressed a little bit. And so in your mindset, I think that's the biggest surprise. What's gone wrong in Baltimore that's allowed for this regression?
Well, I mean, there seems to be some sort of disconnect between the ownership and the GMs, right? I think, they're under new ownership now, with David Rubenstein. And typically when that happens, you expect the team, especially one as ascendant as the Orioles, to come in and make a splash on the free agency market. Maybe even if it's just retaining Corbin Burns, there's, I mean, man, it's the Elias administration, I think, is getting a lot of flack right now, and I think it's just totally deserved. I mean, I'm becoming one of his biggest critics, and it kind of started really this past offseason. I read the Evan Drellick Astros book. It talks a lot about how their front office was run there, and it really seemed like Elias was getting a lot of credit for maybe stuff that Brandon Taubman even was doing. The now, banished Brandon Taubman. So it's like, yes, they were very successful, but also, with getting like Adley and, Jackson Holiday looks pretty good this year too. But it's like, man, they were reliant on a level of tank that you can't even really do anymore because there's a draft lottery. So, I mean, I just feel like they have stalled, and we've seen teams that have had stacked farm systems and really exciting young players in the American League in recent years stall. The Mariners appeared to be in a stall until this year they've shown some life again. The Blue Jays, the Blue Jays had Bo Bichette and Vladdy Jr. Even people were really excited about to round out the trio, Kevin Biggio and some other guys too. And you think this is it, this is all we need, but the lesson here is no matter how stacked the farm system is, no matter how many great young players you produce, you are going to need to supplement that with veterans via free agency. And I think their attempts to do that have been pretty poor. I do want to give them some credit. I think, in theory, losing Santander and replacing him with Tyler O'Neill didn't seem like that bad of an idea. Those are similar-ish enough players in my mind. But yeah, I mean, it has not worked, and they look like they are 2025 is a lost year. And when you have young players like this, like Gunnar, like Adley, who are, so still young and controllable, it's like, this is your prime window to spend. Like, this is, you have these guys and they're going to be cheap. So you need to spend elsewhere. And that hasn't happened.
Yeah, no, I think it's a combination of things, and you bring up those young cores that kind of fizzled out. I mean, to me, it sounds crazy to say it, especially now, but it wasn't that long ago when one of the most exciting young teams in baseball was the Chicago White Sox. And they had that core with Anderson and Moncada and Robert and Jimenez. We're like, this is going to be 4 or 5 years of them just running the American League Central at best, or at worst. At best, this is going to be, a team that's competing for the World Series. Ownership obviously fell apart. I do think there is a when it rains, it pours element to Baltimore right now, because they have at their peak legitimately 8 guys in that rotation who've been injured all at once. I mean, they are better than 15-31, which is what their record is right now. But at the same time, I don't think anybody, expected this kind of downfall. And Yeah, I think they did such a great job of setting up all the pins in the previous few years, but they haven't done a really good job of knocking them down. And I think that players pick up on that as well. You know, the lack of kind of trust in ownership or in leadership there, and it's been frustrating. One team that I'm endlessly fascinated about, and I want to go back to a video that you did 4 years ago that was titled "The Rockies Stink." That was 4 years ago. Things have gotten worse. Now, I've always had, as of now, what are they? 8-39, I think is their record. 8-38 on pace to, and we got a long ways to go here. But in that tough division, on pace to be the worst team ever. The White Sox record has potential to last all of 1 year. I'm very fascinated by the Rockies as an organization because there's really nowhere else. I don't think there's any other team in sports that compares to them in regards to the conditions that they play in. It's not comparable to any other team in baseball, really any other team in sports. We know they're bad. I'm not going to ask you why they're bad. I think the template is out there of the bad decisions they've made and the Bryant contract being a disaster. And I think they're still paying Nolan a little bit of money. I mean, it's all there. You did a whole video about it. But if you were the GM, and you did talk about this in the video you made, what would be the plan for how to win in Colorado? Because the word is out there that it is exponentially harder to pitch there than anywhere else. How would you build there to try to build a continued winner?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, the first thing, they don't have really an analytics department. I mean, they are so lacking in that area. There's an article probably like 2 or 3 years ago now. I don't know if they've expanded a whole lot since then, but the article, the base of it was basically the analytics department in Colorado is one person. That'll do it. That is basically what it was. And I believe she no longer works there. So it could be zero people.
Zero.
So, but I mean, yeah, I mean, I think you've got to accept that you're probably not gonna, lure over free agent pitching. Because these guys have pride and that, they care more about their ERA than their ERA plus. And I don't blame them. It still feels bad to have like a 4 or 5 ERA, even if that's good in course, Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, it's tough. I think you've got to, really focus on like lower spin efficiency fastballs. These are fastballs that don't convert as much of their spin into Magnus force, which is basically means you can get more consistency in terms of ball movement in course versus away from course. They've done some things right. Like I think Brenton Doyle is like a perfect course center fielder. Like would I mean he's hit some, like he hit for them in it pretty well in 2024 actually, but like there's some positions you're going to have to go glove first. And I think like center field is one of those. And I think, having Charlie Blackmon running around playing center like they did for a lot of the late 2010s was not ideal roster construction, even though he was a very good baseball player for them. So, yeah, I mean, I guess first and foremost is you've got to, really bring this team to the data age, because the thing about the Rockies is right now is they know that they're different from the other 29 teams. And even though they haven't really succeeded in the last 5 years, they still feel like their difference is giving them some sort of edge when really they're just being like left behind in the dust.
Yeah. It's the worst situation possible because it's a brutal division, especially right now. That division is historically good. I mean, you have the Diamondbacks in 4th place. That's a good roster. But even beyond that, it's too bad because I think there was a time, and you're completely right about them, that's a place where you need to be driven by analytics and have a really strong analytics department. But there was a time where it was a short window, but they almost got it right, where they had loaded up on 4 or 5 young pitchers, and not all of them developed, but you had John Gray and Marquez and Freeland. And there was about that 2-year window where they had enough pitching to go with the offense that they had with Nolan and Cargo. And then really it kind of started that year where they tried to go with the super pen in free agency, and they went and got Wade Davis and like Brian Shaw, and it completely fell apart. And then really it's become such a sad story, but the Chris Bryant contract, while not something that has killed the organization necessarily, I mean, there's plenty more money to go around. the move itself didn't make sense at the time, I don't think, for either party. And I think it's just become one of these things that they got to watch kind of bleed out now. And he's trying to make a comeback. No, it's been frustrating, and it's a tough organization to win with. And I don't know if they have the right pieces in place. The thing that's been going around lately, because the last time I was on here, a team that we talked about a little bit that had some upside at the time was the Pittsburgh Pirates, because they had called up Skenes, they'd called up Jared Jones. And I feel like in the last year, as has kind of sadly been the Pirates' way for the better part of 30 years, they've found a way to kind of fumble any positive energy that they've had. Derek Shelton out. Was it his fault? No. Sacrificial lamb. That's what happens. And you have now Tiger great Don Kelly taking over as manager for them. And there's these rumors, and Jeff Passan, who does a wonderful job, kind of threw it out there in the Pat McAfee show, the idea of him being traded, or that they should do it. And you look at where the Pirates are at right now, and it's tough because I've seen the take, and I think it's correct. If the Pirates trade Paul Skenes, they're never selling tickets again. Paul Skenes is the biggest brand that they've had since McCutchen at his peak. You could argue he's bigger, really. I mean, in terms of just his kind of celebrity status, but they're not any good. I mean, and I don't think they're very close to being good. And so, where do you stand on those rumors? Do you think there's any legitimacy to it? And whether there is or not, is it a move that you would consider making?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so sympathetic to both sides, because I think what's happening is Pirates fans are hearing these rumors. They're hearing someone like Jeff Passan, someone with the profile of him, say these things, and they can sort of just project their own worst fears about what it means to be a small market team in baseball onto it. And they're saying, look, the media apparatus itself wants us to trade, the most exciting thing that's happened to our franchise, maybe not since Kutch, maybe since Clemente, maybe since Barry Bonds,
Mm-hmm.
So it's so yeah, you can see that insecurity, I think, bubbling up. But at the same time, I kind of agree with the thesis here, which is that if they're not going to win with Paul Skenes, they should trade Paul Skenes. And maybe you can turn, it's like the Simpsons joke, or is it Family Guy or Simpsons, where he's like, it could be anything. It could even be Paul Skenes. It could even
be a boat.
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
Right. It's
yeah,
Family Guy.
And so if you trade Paul Skenes, you could even get an ace pitcher like Paul Skenes, down the line somewhere, and maybe a hitter too. I don't know, but it's like, I actually do totally buy the thesis of, if ownership is not going to invest, you might as well trade Paul Skenes and try to get 4 guys who are young that could be good, that could be, everyday players for you. But at the same time, like you said, if you trade Paul Skenes, you're never going to sell a ticket in that city again, So I'm really sympathetic to both sides. If I were in the position where I was, Ben Sherrington, and I would definitely be shopping around Skenes, because I would say, look, this ownership's not going to help me try to win with what we have right now. So I might as well try to extract the most positive surplus value out of the roster as I can, as it's currently constructed.
You make a perfect point there, and I agree with you completely about being sympathetic towards both sides, because as a fan of baseball and somebody who follows this game closely, Paul Skenes is probably a top 5 brand in this game right now. And there's reasons to it, obviously, with the celebrity status and the Livy Dunn stuff, but so what? The guy throws 100, he's it's a unique story. He's a very unique personality, in the sense that he's almost at points lacking a personality, which makes him kind of funny. He's an interesting guy. But I want to see a guy like that pitching on the biggest stage. And on the other side, I guarantee you, if I was a Pirates fan, what I'd be saying right now is, I understand their goal. Let's go out and get 3 or 4 guys that can be equal to or greater than the sum of one Paul Skenes that we can build a core around. The problem is, 3-4 years from now, they'll be in that exact same place, because they did the same thing with Garrett Cole. Remember, they made the playoffs a few times with Garrett Cole. Cole he didn't bottom out, but he kind of plateaued a little bit. Goes to Houston, revives his career, becomes the highest paid pitcher in baseball. I think there's some fear of what they get in the Cole deal. Musgrove and a few other guys. Musgrove, who ended up pitching his best baseball for the Padres. I think there's just a fear. It's the worst place to be in, and I've been there as a Tiger fan of no matter what we do, it's not going to work, because they don't really do a tremendous job of developing players, and they have ownership that simply isn't investing in their team. A team that, oh wow, what a nice segue here. A team that does have ownership that invests is the Los Angeles Dodgers, who right now are actually losers of 4 in a row, which I find kind of interesting because, if you would have asked preseason, you would have thought that they were going to go 162-0 based on some of the prognosticators. I have a very kind of back and forth view of the Dodgers, which is I don't view anything they're doing as against the rules. I think the deferred payment thing is kind of it's you found a loophole, but there's no salary cap in this league. They're going out and spending. This is not a league where championships or championship runs are guaranteed. I don't view this as the Warriors going out and getting Kevin Durant. It became inevitable that they were going to be in the finals 3 years in a row. But there has been the counter argument of, them kind of spending their way through everybody and acquiring as many Hall of Famers and all-star talents as possible. Do you view them as something that is bad for the game, or are you more indifferent about it and just view it as part of the current system?
Yeah, I'm indifferent to it. It's part of the current system. I think, the fact of the matter is, like, as stacked as the roster is, if you give me, betting odds, if it's Dodgers 50-50 versus the field to win the World Series, like, you take the field every time. Right. I mean, that's just the nature of the randomness of the playoff system in this sport. They're constructed in a manner that, they can, make the playoffs every year, right? That's really the goal, is make the playoffs, probably get that, first round bye so you don't have to play a wild card series. And that's, you punch as many tickets to the postseason as you can. That's how you basically form a dynasty these days. And I think back to it, as a Braves fan, my Braves through my childhood won the division 14 years in a row. Yeah. But other teams were still allowed to compete. They only won one World Series. The Mets, in that time frame, went to a World Series. The Phillies in that, well, I guess afterwards, but the Phillies not long after won a World Series. So it's like, it's possible that they can punch these tickets up every year, but not really ever go back to back or never three-peat, like I think everyone's just assuming is going to happen. But yeah, I don't really have a problem with their spending. I think the one thing I have a slight problem with is I don't love that. And listen, this is a big part of their global strategy and why they've been successful. I don't love the idea that all the East Asian talent are going to be consolidated onto them. I'm not sure if that's necessarily great for the sport. If fan bases that rabid are only going to be drawn to the Dodgers for that reason. That was the calculus they made when they signed Ohtani, right? You're probably not going to get actually that much surplus WAR value from like a $700 million DH, but you are going to get it, from, Roki Sasaki, who you can pay, peanuts for. So that's kind of the game they're playing.
Just kind of an offshoot of that. Do you think the concerns with Sasaki are legit?
Yes.
I do too.
The fastball was declining really from about 2023 onwards in Japan. Even in, last year in 2024, which was sort of his platform year, coming over to the United States his last year in Japan, the NPB hitters found his fastball to be very hittable. And, this guy used to be pumping, 100, 101 pretty regularly. And now they've got him averaging, 95. The good news is, like, even if it's the worst, scenario you can probably imagine, which would be like, Tommy John or something like that, like he's making the league minimum, like it's like the amount of money he would, potentially make, across the next, 6 years, like even if you go through that whole process with him, like you're still going to get, surplus value. But yeah, I am worried about him. I mean, I don't, I'm not of the opinion it seems like he's going to contribute all that much this year. But I'm also, he's like Skenes' age, like he's younger than a lot of the top pitching prospects in the game right now, and maybe deserves to be treated as such, because it's not like a case with Yamamoto where Yamamoto was coming over like just so polished already,
Yeah, and has developed into one of the best pitchers in the game. All right, I love watching Yamamoto. No, I think you're correct. I think it's a combination of, the stuff being diminished or, velocity going down was a documented thing coming in. I don't recall a ton of this in Japan, but it's the walk rate and the lack of strike throwing was very bizarre. I mean, in the early part of the season, guys were just spitting on pitches, and he was just loading up the base. It was very bizarre. Ultimately, they'll be fine. And that is an interesting point you bring up, because like I think back to, I would say that the current age of Dodger baseball, and it's gotten the like Disney, the organization, the corporation has expanded, so to speak. But I would say it began probably like 2013 was when this run of like playoff success started. We've seen the Giants win a championship and then have a 107 win season. The Rockies have won a playoff series. The Padres have beaten them in the playoffs. So like it's not this impossible thing. And it kind of goes back to something that you brought up about, a lot of these organizations, the whole goal is like, let's get there. And then there's kind of a flukiness to, the one or two, the postseason where you have the biggest sample size in the world, the 162, and then you play a bad week and it's done. Do you think to a certain extent that that's overblown? Do you believe that there is a formula to winning in October and building a team that's capable of winning in October? Or do you think it is more simple of just catch a team at the right time or the wrong time?
Yeah, I think it's more so the latter. I mean, I've thought about this. There are some things you can point to, like top end starting pitching is going to be more important than like who your fourth or fifth best guy is. Like your fifth best starter is like really important to help you win in the regular season and punch that ticket. And then a lot of the time what happens is once you reach the postseason, he becomes like a low leverage, long relief, like mop up guy. So it's like, yes, this is a very important pitcher who's going to make, the 5 spot in the rotation is going to make about as many starts as the 1 spot in the regular season. So, it's important to get that right, but you get to the postseason, maybe it's not that important. But I mean, apart from that, I hear people say, oh, we want contact hitting in the postseason. That works better than, power hitting, for example. But it's like, yeah, but you're probably not going to like win a series unless you out homer the other team, maybe the contact team has more consistency week to week. Or maybe not. Maybe they're playing the BABIP lottery more, So I really don't think there's like a very clear, like, this is how you build a team to win in the postseason that's separate from this is how you build a team to win in the regular season. I really don't.
Yeah, I would agree. And I've heard, because I go back to when he was in Detroit, I've heard that argument with Dave Dombrowski of like Dombrowski teams are better built to win in October because he loves top tier starting pitching. He loves guys who can hit for power. He builds typically deep, often star studded lineups. But whether it was with the Tigers or the Phillies or any of the other teams he's had, his bullpen construction often is scarce or inconsistent at best. His teams don't do a lot of fundamental things well. They don't play defense well. They don't run the bases well. It's like, and then you get that in a small sample size, you never know. And like last year's Phillies, that was probably one of the best bullpens they've had in a long time. It's disaster against the Mets. Like you just never really know, how things are going to are going to play out. The name of the game is just winning the division as much as possible. You get in, good things can happen. As far as, last time I was on, I asked you about kind of some of the rule changes and how you felt about them. But I think we've reached a point now where the world has adjusted to the rule changes and kind of the current age of baseball. But there are some things that are up in the air that I wanted to ask you about. And that's that, like, I feel like television in general and the way that sports are consumed is ever changing and evolving. And we got the news, obviously, this year that ESPN was getting rid of Sunday Night Baseball, which wasn't, I don't think, that big a surprise. And I'll be honest with you, not that crushing of a blow, in my opinion. But we now have these local broadcast crews that are, at least locally here in Detroit, that are kind of not in limbo necessarily, but we don't know exactly what the future holds for them. They have this contract with FanDuel at this point. In your mind, what do you feel like is the future of baseball consumption on television? Is it individual streaming services? Is it things staying on cable? Is it a more national brand? Where do you think things kind of go?
This is a good segue from the Dodgers talk, because I think what we're seeing now is a widening of the gap between the haves and the have-nots, the big market versus the small market, and really the valuable TV contracts versus the not so valuable TV contracts. I think, again, my Braves are a pretty good example here, right? The Sinclair regional sports networks. This will tell you about the instability. Formerly Fox Sports, formerly Bally, now FanDuel. They've given up, a lot of teams. They've trimmed down the fat, but they will never give up the Braves because that is a very valuable contract to have. It covers so many fans, in the region, not just in Georgia, but in the Carolinas, in Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, North Florida. All those people root for the Braves for the most part. And so I think, what you'll see is like big market teams will continue to extract a ton of value from their TV contracts. And I think smaller market teams are going to have to find a different way. And I think those are the teams that are going to be, turning more to the direct to consumer type model. And I don't know if that's going to be necessarily more profitable for them. The good news is, to some extent, is that there is revenue sharing of those contracts, and I think it's possible though that if that gap continues to widen, then in the CBA they're going to have to figure out a way to keep it on a fair-ish enough playing field financially. Because basically what the worst owners do, what the most miserly do, is they just basically, it's 1-to-1 their TV money versus their team's salary, so they're basically saying we pay the whole team based on the TV money, and if that goes down, then payroll for them is going to somehow crater.
Yeah, right. You mentioned the CBA, and I think going back to it, time flies, man, because I remember when it was announced that the lockout was done in 22, and they ended up playing a full season. And I think the general response at the time was like, this is kind of a miracle that they're going to get a full season in, but wait 4 more years and we're going to get another one of these. There's going to be more, CBA frustrations and more, probably a potential lockout. I believe it's after 26. Am I correct?
Sorry. I really apologize for that.
No, you're fine.
I was shooting a text to someone. Can you please ask that one more time? I'm so sorry.
You're good. No, you're good. Next potential lockout, is the CBA up after 26?
Let's see. So there was after it's either 26 or 27. I think you're right. I think it's 26.
Yeah, because then it would be 22, 23, 24, 20. Yeah, 5 years, and then the next one would be after. So the number one thing I remember hearing is like, hey, we got it done in 22, but it's inevitable that there's going to be another one. And it seems like with the number of things that have happened, some very good for baseball and some not so great, is a lockout inevitable following 26? And if so, what are the biggest issues that Major League Baseball is going to be facing in order to make sure that we can, get back to playing again?
Yeah, I think it is, like you alluded to earlier, like the reliance on cable money and cables dying, So yeah, I think that is going to be sort of the biggest discussion is it could be revenue sharing, how that is distributed. If I were the players, I think I would probably come at it from the perspective of worrying not so much about the top end contracts, but trying to see like get a good raise on the league minimum salary like they did in the previous CBA. The other wrinkle in the next CBA negotiation is the fact that minor leaguers are now part of the MLBPA, and it's tough because they're from the same class of baseball player, but the interests of a minor league 12th rounder and the interests of Juan Soto are different. And so I think that the union itself is going to have to, find a negotiation strategy that somehow speaks to both those classes of professional baseball players. So I think that is going to be an interesting wrinkle as well.
I think, and we talked about it with the Rockies a minute ago, but we've seen over the last 3-4 years, not to say that didn't exist before that, just the bottoming out of certain teams. I just don't think is good for the sport. And teams that don't, the White Sox are not a small market team. I mean, it's Chicago. It's one of the biggest markets. I wouldn't call, Denver, Colorado a small market. With, the draft lottery and the implementation of some of those things to kind of try to prevent tanking, is there any possibility that a salary floor of some kind is implemented just to make sure that, you don't have teams that are going into the season with, 100 losses that they can check off right away?
I wouldn't mind it. Like, just for me, neutrally as a fan, I wouldn't mind seeing MLB simultaneously institute a floor and cap at the same time. And theoretically, that could be a bit of a compromise between ownership and the players union. The question of could it happen? I think not. I think just any sort of salary cap is a non-starter for the union, and any sort of salary floor is a non-starter for ownership. So I don't think that you're going to see the sport align itself with, the way that's handled in, say, the NBA or NFL in any meaningful way.
I would agree. I think that I would agree in the sense I would like to see it, just because I mean we went through it in Detroit. Other teams gone through it. The fact that basically you can take 10 teams every year, and I'm probably being generous with that, and just say like, yeah, I mean, it's a non-starter. Like there's not going to be any competitive nature to this ball club. I think is terrible. Like we're not even 50 games into the season and we're talking about the Rockies being the worst team ever. I mean, I don't think that's a good step, but I don't see anything particularly changing in that aspect. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, it'll be interesting to see, and I'm sure we'll be, or at least I'll be, sweating it out, because I think baseball's in from a viewership standpoint and a consumer standpoint, a pretty good place. And I feel like when that happens, baseball does a tremendous job of shooting themselves in the foot often. I mean, you go back to kind of like they were in a good place in the 90s and the steroid era happens. And then, some other things go down, the sign stealing and COVID, like it's all kind of, I feel like they have a tendency to be somewhat self-destructive. When you break down players, and I recommend obviously the people following me follow both the Foolish Bailey account and the Foolish Baseball account. Now you take into account batted ball data so much, or pitch data with pitchers, and I think that's fair, and it's something that honestly through your channel I've become more cognizant to. I think Baseball Savant is a wonderful source of figuring out if a guy's success is sustainable over time, but there are those anomalies, and you can't answer Luis Arraez with this question because I feel like that would be the obvious one. But who's a player in your mind? It could be a pitcher or a hitter where the data just does not support them being productive, and yet they just are. Who's a guy that goes against the analytics?
Ooh, that's a good one. I'm going to pull up here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull up a little spreadsheet.
Please do. No,
I'm going to pull up a spreadsheet just for my own personal use. I've been working on some hitting stuff, and I was sort of looking at guys. I mean, I think, if I'm looking at it in terms of 2025, I mean, freaking Mookie Betts sometimes, man. Like, really? There's yes, he's walking as much as he strikes out. Maybe people are going to think this is a terrible example, but in theory, he should have no pop. The bat speed is down year over year. His the weight loss coming into the season was very much a big talking point. His barrel rate right now is 4%. And yet he has 8 homers in 45 games. He's homering at about the rate you'd normally expect him to do so. He has a 124 WRC plus, and this was after some slumpage during the season. So I mean, I think that there are guys like that, and a lot of the guys that can sort of defy at least surface level analytics are guys who just really have the preternatural ability to pull a baseball in the air. Jose Ramirez, Isaac Paredes, those guys to some extent. I guess you could make the argument that analytics accounts for that, but I mean that's sort of an archetype. I think as far as pitchers go, it's I would say command pitchers in general. I'm gonna use a weird example here. Skenes seems to have a decent strikeout rate and a decent amount of strikeouts, despite the fact that if you look at his, the way his fastball moves, it doesn't actually imply that high of a strikeout rate. He's not getting an insane amount of induced vertical break. There's a lot of actually hemming and hawing about his fastball shape in the analytical community as he was coming, out of the draft. But the real fact of the matter is he's got the raw velo and he's got the sort of the pitch ability to make up for the fact that his fastball shape, it's not that it isn't ideal, but it is not prototypical based on what we've seen, across the last 10 years or so of the StatCast era. It's not the high backspin, high carry, throw it in the upper third of the zone and just, rack up, swinging strikeouts type of fastball we've seen, just to use an example, a guy like Verlander throw, for the last, 15 or so years. It's something different. And I mean, I know, again, it sounds like a joke to say, hey, this guy who throws 98 is somehow, defying analytics, but it's yes, to some extent he is, because of just the pitch ability that, that is harder to measure than the raw stuff.
Yeah. Not all velos created equal. I mean, it's weird how that works. I remember one of the early examples that I can remember when I was really getting into baseball analytics was those few years, I think it was with Toronto, where J Happ was really good, and he was just throwing 92, 93, but he had this high spin rate on his fastball, and was getting weak contact and swing and miss. One of a player that we always go back to here, because he's still actually currently on the roster, was Akil Baddoo, who had like the greatest first week in the history of baseball, and had a good rookie season, like a 766 OPS, 112 OPS plus, 2 WAR, like a lot to like. And this is over a full season. I mean, the guy played 124 games that year, but 6th percentile in average exit velo, 14th percentile in expected batting average, 26th in xWOBA, 14th in hard hit rate. Like, when you have a guy who has, by definition, that successful of a season with those poor of underlying numbers, is it as simple as they just had a whole season of luck, or is there something a little bit more explainable?
I think there are some cases where a player comes up and succeeds, and they give off the appearance of getting lucky maybe across their first season, but that luck is sort of offset in future seasons by just getting better. So I think that can definitely happen.
Fair. Yeah.
So that, Akil Baddoo at that time was 22. I know he hasn't been particularly good since. So maybe in that sense, he was able to beat the analytics in a small sample, but not a large sample. But yeah, like he could have just, he could have erased whatever luck deficit existed there, if he got better in some of those areas you just, described. But yeah, I think hitters can get lucky, but I also think there can just be fluctuations in their true talent. A good example of this that's happening in the league right now that comes to mind is Carson Kelly sort of hitting like Barry Bonds for the first 5 to 6 weeks of the season.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you look at it and it's like, it's like, well, I mean, he's homering every, 15 plate appearances, and he's walking more than he's striking out. And, his, average exit velocity, hard hit rate, barrel rate are just way higher than they've ever been at any point in his career. Like, is that, I wouldn't really call that lucky, like that's just Carson Kelly has hit really well for the past 6 weeks. But I think, the fact of the matter is like hitters can have those fluctuations without it being in our, general understanding of the framework of luck. It's not just like BABIP. Daniel Vogelbach had a run like this in 2019. Yeah. Eric Thames had a run like this in 2017. Davis Schneider had a run like this 2 years ago. So I think the fact of the matter is that, the true talent level of a hitter, or the true, underlying performance of really any player, these guys are really good, and I think it can fluctuate quite a bit across the course of a season or career, especially if you start to break it down into, 100 plate appearance chunks or like 50 inning chunks.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's the deeper a guy gets into his career, pitchers adjust, guys in the league adjust. I mean, you figure out, and the real ones, like, they figure out a way to just sustain it. I mean, there's been, you bring up pitchers, obviously, there's probably been about 2 or 3 times in which we thought Verlander was on the verge of being cooked, and then he reinvented himself again, or, found velo again. You never really know how that stuff is going to work out. Last question here, because one rule change that I think we are so close to is the ABS system being implemented. And I asked you about it a little bit last time, but I think it's coming. I think it's all but inevitable. If it's not next season, it'll be at some point in the future. And my question to you, because one thing that you've broken down a lot is the importance of defensive catchers and the importance of pitch framing. Do you feel like the implementation of the ABS system will change how catchers are evaluated, where maybe defense, game calling, and pitch framing isn't as important as it once was because that system exists? Or do you still feel like there will always be a place for the Jeff Mathises, the Jake Rogers, the Martin Maldonados of the world?
Yeah, I mean, you can break catching down into maybe like, 3 or 4 components defensively. It's like, let's say it's calling the game, framing the pitches, controlling the run game, and then blocks, blocking the ball in the dirt. Let's say you could break down those 4 things with an ABS, system. If it's full ABS, which I don't think it'll be, you effectively eliminate one of those 4. What we're probably getting is what you said is that sort of compromise, that, tap the head challenge system. Yes. and in that case, some of these guys can, I mean, some of these guys can steal like 5 or 10 strikes even, like if the ump's really bad, like in a game, and like chances are you're not going to be able to call them all out correctly in a challenge situation, or you're going to lose that ability to challenge and then have them stolen from you later on in the game. So I don't think that would be totally gone, but I do think there would be sort of a reprioritization of what it means to be a catcher in the big leagues under such a system. I think one of the things is that between the mental energy of calling the game, between the fact that a lot of guys do like the one knee down thing specifically to try to steal the low strike in the framing, and but maybe that also for some of them at least hurts the ability to come out of that crouch and throw out the base runner. I think what would happen is if the framing is less prioritized, that you would see the league make gains in some of those other areas because you wouldn't need as much focus on the receiving as you would. So maybe catchers, you'd see more of like the strong-armed catcher who's not that good of a framer. You'd see, more of the great game-calling catcher who's lost some of the physical ability to play, the position properly. So I think there would be some of that. So I do think, I don't want to totally say like the Austin Hedges types or the Jeff Mathis types would be out of a job because they do bring other things up to the game other than the framing. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, in terms of things that are quantifiable, framing is maybe the most impactful defensive act any defender on the field can have. You look at the runs that someone like Jose Molina got from framing, it's probably more runs than any outfielder could get from their range or any shortstop could get from their arm, at least on a rate basis, because you have a chance to influence the outcome of the game with every pitch and not just when the ball is hit to you.
It's a great point. Yeah, and I think for that reason, those guys will find a way to stay around. It is because the microscope, I'm sure, is held up to them now. But like the more games I watch, the more I'm like, I really want to see this implemented. And it's not even like I feel like my team gets screwed type of thing. Everybody could say that, but that's life of being a fan. It's just I see guys put together really remarkable at bats that are 2-0 counts that are then 2-1 counts, or 1-1 counts that are then 1-2 counts because a bad pitch is called a strike. It's like it's human. It's not an intentional thing, but it's just I think it's time for that change, and it's coming. I mean, I've said it many times. You are absolutely one of the best, man. I appreciate you hopping on this show. Your following is obviously significantly bigger than mine. But we'll still make sure to push your socials and everything, because some of the most fascinating baseball content on the internet comes from you, man, and I appreciate you always doing me a favor and joining the program. So we will have you back again in the future, but thanks for coming on.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
Always a good time with Bailey, man. Such an intelligent guy. I mean, such a knowledgeable voice for baseball. And I think that we live in a world right now, whether you're on TikTok, YouTube, what have you, there are so many, male and female, so many unique, fun content creators in the baseball sphere right now. And obviously Bailey, I think, is one of the very best, and we've seen him make appearances on other shows. And I mean, in many ways, I find his story to be pretty inspiring, man. I mean, it's a guy who bet on himself. He's been grinding for a long time. He's created a brand on his own, puts a ton of effort into the stuff he does, and very easy guy to talk to. So hopefully you guys enjoyed wall-to-wall ball talk. Baseball talk. That sounds kind of weird, but thank you again to him. We'll have him on again in the future. He's marvelous. But you can follow me on Twitter at Castellani2014. You can find this podcast on YouTube. You can find it on Apple Podcasts. You can find it on Spotify. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. If you're watching, I have a scratchy eye right now. My apologies to the people watching this. Terrible visual on YouTube. But it's an audio medium. I don't know. I can't make excuses. All right. Anyway, let's wrap this thing up. CastellaniContent.com. You'll find everything that we have is locked and loaded on that website. And lastly, of course, Lone Goat, June 6th, Detroit Tiger fan watch party. Really, really looking forward to that. And mingling with the fans, talking with the fans, and hopefully watching a Detroit Tigers victory as kind of a pseudo 30th birthday celebration for yours truly that I will not take lightly. So thank you very much for your continual support. We will be back with more content later this week as we continue to pump things out. Shout out to Austin Sisler, who continues to do an unbelievable job with the production stuff, the artist behind the lens. You guys are the best. Continue to subscribe, support, follow us on TikTok, all the platforms. We're trying to be as consistent as possible. It means a lot. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Peace and happiness.
It's an unfair game. We got to think differently.